By the time our engagement party invitations were sent out, Astrid had already made it crystal clear to everyone in our social circle how she really felt about marriage. She told her girlfriends with a bitter laugh, "Honestly, I'd rather die single than be trapped in some suffocating relationship for the rest of my life." I'm Ryker Stone, her fiancé of 2 years. But 3 weeks later, her sweet and caring best friend Daisy pulled me aside after our engagement dinner disaster and whispered something that changed everything. "Ryker, I've been in love with you since the day we met, and I can't watch Astrid destroy your happiness anymore." When Astrid walked in on me down on one knee, proposing to Daisy in her own apartment, the look of pure shock and rage on her face was something I'll never forget. But by then, I had finally realized the truth about who really deserved my heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Astrid Finch had perfected the art of making engagement feel like a prison sentence. By our 2nd year together, she'd already shot down every wedding venue suggestion, dismissed every date proposal, and made it abundantly clear to anyone who'd listen that marriage was an outdated institution designed to trap independent women. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd said yes to my proposal 2 years ago, only to spend every day since then acting like I'd somehow tricked her into it. "Ryker, can you please stop hovering?" Astrid snapped as I tried to help her carry groceries into our shared apartment in Willowbrook Heights. "I'm perfectly capable of handling a few bags without your unnecessary assistance." Her tone was sharp enough to cut glass, the same tone she'd been using with me for months now. I stepped back, watching her struggle with the heavy bags while refusing my help. This was Astrid in a nutshell, fiercely independent to the point of self-sabotage, treating every kind gesture like an insult to her capabilities. Her friends at Meridian Creative Agency, where she worked as a graphic designer, had gotten used to her constant complaints about relationship obligations and suffocating expectations. "Maybe if you actually listened when I told you I prefer the organic market on 5th Street, we wouldn't have to make these heavy trips to the discount place," she continued, dumping the bags on our granite countertop with unnecessary force. The engagement ring on her finger caught the afternoon light streaming through our floor-to-ceiling windows, a 2-carat emerald-cut diamond that had cost me 3 months' salary from my job at Sterling & Associates investment firm. She'd barely looked at it when I proposed at the Rosewood Botanical Gardens, and these days she seemed to forget she was wearing it entirely. "I thought you said you wanted to save money for the wedding," I replied quietly, starting to unpack the groceries. Astrid's laugh was bitter and sharp. "What wedding, Ryker? The imaginary one where I pretend to be the blushing bride while you parade me around like some trophy you've won." That stung, but it wasn't the first time she'd said something like this. Ever since we'd gotten engaged, Astrid had treated our relationship like a burden she was obligated to carry. Every romantic gesture was met with suspicion, every attempt at intimacy was rebuffed with complaints about expectations and pressure. The worst part was how different she became around other people. At work events or social gatherings, Astrid transformed into the charming, witty woman I'd fallen in love with. She'd laugh at other people's jokes, engage in animated conversations about art and design, and radiate the confidence that had first attracted me to her at a gallery opening 3 years ago. But the moment we were alone, the walls went back up. "Your friend Daisy called earlier," I mentioned, hoping to lighten the mood. "She wanted to know if we're still on for dinner at Harvest Moon Bistro tomorrow night." Astrid's expression softened slightly at the mention of her best friend. Daisy Harper was probably the only person who could consistently bring out Astrid's better nature. They'd been inseparable since college, and Daisy had been the maid of honor at our engagement party. The same party where Astrid had spent most of the evening complaining to anyone who'd listen about the ridiculous spectacle of public declarations of love. "Fine, yes, we'll go," Astrid said, though even her agreement sounded like a concession she was making under duress. "But I'm not discussing wedding plans. I'm sick of everyone acting like my entire identity should revolve around being someone's future wife." I nodded, having learned long ago that arguing with Astrid when she was in one of these moods only made things worse. Instead, I focused on putting away groceries and tried not to think about how exhausting it had become to constantly walk on eggshells around the woman I was supposed to be planning a life with. The apartment we shared in Willowbrook Heights was beautiful, modern, spacious, with a view of the city skyline that took your breath away at sunset. But lately, it felt more like a beautifully decorated prison where Astrid and I existed in separate bubbles, intersecting only when absolutely necessary. That evening, as we sat at opposite ends of our leather sectional sofa, Astrid scrolling through her phone while I tried to watch the news, I found myself wondering when exactly everything had gone so wrong. When had the woman who used to surprise me with homemade lunches at work become someone who treated every meal I cooked like an imposition? When had the person who used to steal my hoodies because they smelled like me become someone who flinched when I tried to hold her hand? "I'm going to bed," Astrid announced at 9:30, not bothering to look up from her phone. "Try not to make too much noise when you come up." I watched her disappear up the stairs to our bedroom, her engagement ring catching the light one more time before she was gone. And I sat there in the growing darkness of our living room, wondering if this was what the rest of my life was going to look like. The beginning hadn't been like this. When I first met Astrid at the Moonlight Gallery downtown, she'd been everything I'd never known I was looking for. It was a Friday evening art exhibition featuring emerging local artists, and I'd gone more for the networking opportunity than any real appreciation for contemporary art. But there she was, standing in front of a massive abstract painting, arguing passionately with the artist about the emotional resonance of color theory. "You're using red as an aggressive force," she was saying, her dark hair catching the gallery's ambient lighting as she gestured toward the canvas. "But red can be nurturing, passionate, life-giving. You're limiting yourself by defaulting to the obvious interpretation." The artist, a pretentious guy in his 40s who'd been holding court all evening, looked stunned that someone was challenging his artistic vision. But Astrid wasn't being cruel, she was genuinely engaged, offering insights that came from a place of deep understanding and appreciation for the medium. I found myself moving closer, drawn by her intelligence and the way she commanded the conversation without dominating it. When the artist finally walked away, muttering something about unqualified opinions, I couldn't help but approach her. "That was impressive," I'd said. "I don't think anyone's challenged him all evening." Astrid had turned to me with a smile that was both shy and confident, a combination I later learned was quintessentially her. "Someone should. Art is meant to provoke discussion, not worship. If he can't handle a different perspective, maybe he should consider a less public medium." We'd talked for 3 hours that night, moving from the gallery to a nearby coffee shop and then walking through Crescent Park until nearly midnight. Astrid was brilliant, funny, and refreshingly direct. She told me about her work in graphic design, her passion for visual storytelling, and her dreams of eventually opening her own creative studio. I shared my own ambitions in finance, my plans to start my own investment consulting firm, and my somewhat embarrassing confession that I'd only come to the gallery to meet potential clients. "At least you're honest about it," she'd laughed. "Most people pretend they're deep and cultured when really they're just hoping to impress someone." The first 6 months of our relationship had been magical. Astrid was affectionate without being clingy, independent without being distant. She'd surprise me with thoughtful gestures, tickets to a jazz concert when I mentioned loving Miles Davis, homemade pasta when I had a particularly stressful week at work, little sketches she'd draw and leave in my jacket pockets. Her best friend Daisy had been part of our story from the beginning. They worked at the same creative agency, though Daisy was in the marketing department while Astrid focused on design. Daisy was warm and bubbly, where Astrid was cool and analytical, but their friendship worked because they balanced each other perfectly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Daisy keeps me grounded," Astrid had explained early in our relationship. "She reminds me that not everything has to be complicated or profound. Sometimes a sunset is just beautiful, not a metaphor for the passage of time." Daisy, for her part, seemed genuinely happy about Astrid's relationship with me. She'd often join us for dinners or weekend activities, and I appreciated how she could draw out Astrid's softer side in a way that no one else seemed capable of doing. The change had started gradually, so subtly that I'd almost missed it at first. It began around our 1-year anniversary, right around the time people started asking when we were going to take the next step. Astrid began pulling away from romantic gestures, claiming they felt performative and expected. She started working later hours, spending more time with colleagues, and finding excuses to avoid the intimate evenings we used to treasure. When I finally proposed at the Rosewood Botanical Gardens, the same place we'd had our first official date, her reaction had been so lukewarm that I'd wondered if I'd misread our entire relationship. She'd said yes, but it felt more like she was checking off a societal obligation than celebrating a moment of joy. "Marriage is just a legal contract," she'd said, when we told her parents the news. "It doesn't change anything fundamental about our relationship." But it had changed things, just not in the way I'd expected. Instead of bringing us closer together, the engagement seemed to trigger every fear and insecurity Astrid had about commitment and traditional relationship expectations. She began treating me like an adversary in some battle I didn't even know we were fighting. The worst part was how she still maintained her friendships, especially with Daisy. Around others, she was still the charismatic, engaging woman I'd fallen in love with. It was only with me that she'd become this cold, resentful stranger who treated every conversation like an interrogation and every gesture of affection like a trap. Daisy had tried to help, gently encouraging Astrid to communicate more openly about whatever was bothering her. But Astrid had shut down those conversations too, insisting that everything was fine and that people needed to stop overanalyzing her perfectly normal behavior. Now, 2 years after the proposal, I was living with someone who acted like being engaged to me was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And I was starting to wonder if maybe she was right. The dinner at Harvest Moon Bistro the following evening was supposed to be a pleasant evening with friends. Daisy had made the reservation, choosing the restaurant because she knew Astrid loved their seasonal menu and the cozy atmosphere created by exposed brick walls and soft Edison bulb lighting. But within 10 minutes of sitting down, I knew the evening was going to be another exercise in public humiliation. "Oh, Ryker wants to order wine for the table," Astrid announced to Daisy with that particular tone she used when she wanted to make me sound presumptuous. "He has this thing about making decisions for other people, as if we can't possibly choose our own drinks." I hadn't even suggested ordering wine. I'd simply picked up the wine list to browse while we looked at the menu. Daisy's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sure he was just looking," she said gently, but Astrid was already rolling her eyes. "Trust me, I live with him. Everything becomes a production where he has to be the helpful boyfriend." She made air quotes around helpful, as if kindness was something to be mocked. This had become Astrid's pattern over the past year, turning every social interaction into an opportunity to undermine me in subtle but cutting ways. If I held a door, I was being patronizing. If I offered to pay for dinner, I was making assumptions about gender roles. If I suggested an activity, I was being controlling. But if I didn't do any of these things, I was distant and unengaged. "So how are the wedding plans coming along?" asked Jake Morrison, Daisy's colleague, who'd joined us for dinner. It was an innocent enough question, but I saw Astrid's jaw tighten immediately. "What wedding plans?" Astrid laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We're apparently just supposed to magically materialize a wedding without discussing what either of us actually wants." This was another favorite tactic of hers, making it sound like I was pressuring her into wedding planning, when the truth was that every time I tried to bring up venues, dates, or any concrete plans, she'd shut the conversation down with complaints about rushing and societal pressure. Daisy intervened smoothly, the way she always did when Astrid's behavior became too uncomfortable. "I saw the most beautiful wedding photos in Bridal Elegance magazine," she said, pulling out her phone. "The ceremony was at Silverstone Manor, right outside the city. The gardens were absolutely stunning." For a moment, Astrid's expression softened as she looked at Daisy's phone. "That is gorgeous," she admitted, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe we could have a normal conversation about our future. But then Astrid caught herself, and the walls went back up. Of course the bride probably spent 2 years stressing herself into a nervous breakdown to achieve that effortless look. "Wedding planning doesn't have to be stressful," Jake offered. "My sister just got married, and she said the key was, let me guess," Astrid interrupted. "Communication and compromise, because that's what everyone says, but what it really means is the woman does all the emotional labor, while the man shows up and nods approvingly at her choices." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "Astrid, that's not true." She turned to me with that challenging look I'd come to dread. "When was the last time you researched venues, Ryker, or caterers, or florists? You say you want to plan a wedding, but what you really want is for me to plan a wedding while you occasionally offer input." The unfairness of this accusation stung, especially since every attempt I'd made to research vendors or venues had been met with criticism about my choices or complaints that I was taking over her vision. Daisy was looking increasingly uncomfortable, her usual bright demeanor dimmed by the tension at our table. "Maybe we could talk about something else," she suggested gently, but Astrid wasn't finished. "No, I think this is important. Everyone keeps asking about wedding plans like it's the most natural thing in the world, but no one ever asks if I actually want to get married. What if I don't? What if the whole institution feels like a trap designed to turn independent women into domestic accessories? The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too warm. Other diners were starting to glance in our direction, drawn by Astrid's increasingly animated voice. I wanted to disappear, to be anywhere but sitting across from the woman I was supposed to be building a life with, while she publicly dismantled our relationship. Astrid, Daisy said quietly, maybe this isn't the best place. For what? Honesty? Astrid's laugh was bitter. God forbid I express any doubts about signing away my independence for the sake of social conformity. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not with anger, but with a kind of crushing clarity. I looked across the table at this woman, who'd been systematically destroying my self-worth for months, who treated every expression of love like a personal attack, who seemed genuinely happier when she was making me miserable. Excuse me, I said quietly, standing up from the table. I need some air. I walked outside into the cool evening, breathing deeply, and trying to process what had just happened. Through the restaurant's large windows, I could see Daisy leaning across the table, speaking earnestly to Astrid, probably trying to smooth over the situation like she always did. That's when it hit me. Daisy was always there, always trying to mediate, always working to bring out the best in Astrid, even when Astrid seemed determined to show her worst. And unlike me, Daisy never seemed to take Astrid's coldness personally. She understood something about her best friend that I was clearly missing. When I returned to the table 15 minutes later, Astrid was back to her phone, scrolling through social media as if nothing had happened. But Daisy looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, concern mixed with something that might have been sympathy. Everything okay? Daisy asked softly. I nodded, though we both knew it wasn't true. Nothing had been okay for a long time, and I was finally starting to accept that maybe it never would be. The text message from Daisy came 3 days after the disaster at Harvest Moon Bistro. Hey, want to grab coffee? I think we need to talk about what happened the other night. I stared at my phone during my lunch break at Sterling and Associates, sitting in my corner office overlooking downtown Millbrook. The city stretched out below me, busy and purposeful, while I felt more lost than ever. Part of me wanted to decline Daisy's invitation. Talking about Astrid's behavior felt like betraying her, even though she'd been the one acting terribly in public. But another part of me, the part that had been slowly suffocating under the weight of Astrid's constant criticism and emotional distance, desperately needed to talk to someone who might understand what I was going through. I texted back, sure, Lighthouse Cafe on Maple Street at 4, perfect. See you there. Lighthouse Cafe was one of those cozy independent coffee shops that specialized in artisanal everything, hand-roasted beans, locally sourced pastries, and furniture that looked like it had been rescued from someone's grandmother's attic. It was the kind of place Astrid used to love, before she'd decided that enjoying simple pleasures was somehow beneath her evolved sensibilities. Daisy was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, with 2 steaming mugs in front of her. She'd ordered for both of us, something she'd done countless times during our group outings, somehow always remembering that I preferred dark roast with just a splash of cream. Thanks for meeting me, she said as I slid into the booth across from her. Up close, I could see the concern etched in her features, the way her usually bright green eyes were shadowed with worry. Daisy Harper had always been beautiful in a way that snuck up on you. She wasn't striking like Astrid, with her sharp cheekbones and dramatic dark hair. Instead, Daisy had the kind of beauty that came from warmth and genuine kindness. Strawberry blonde hair that caught the light, a sprinkling of freckles across her nose, and a smile that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. I've been thinking about the other night, she began, wrapping her hands around her mug, about how Astrid was acting, and well, how you looked. How I looked. Daisy's expression was gentle but direct. Like you were drowning, Ryker. Like you've been drowning for a while now. The simple acknowledgement of what I'd been feeling hit me harder than I'd expected. For months, I'd been trying to convince myself that Astrid's behavior was just a phase, that the stress of wedding planning or work was making her act out. But hearing someone else, someone who knew both of us well, validate what I'd been experiencing, felt like finally being allowed to breathe. I don't know what happened to her, I said quietly. Or to us. She used to be different. She used to be happy, Daisy said simply. With you, with life, with herself. But something changed after you got engaged,
and I don't think she even realizes how cruel she's become. We sat in silence for a moment. The ambient noise of the cafe, clinking mugs, quiet conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, filling the space between us. I've tried talking to her about it, Daisy continued, multiple times, but she just shuts down or gets defensive. She acts like there's nothing wrong with treating you like an inconvenience, instead of the man she's supposed to be building a life with. Maybe there isn't anything wrong with it, I said, surprised by the bitterness in my own voice. Maybe this is just who she really is, and I was too infatuated to see it before. Daisy shook her head firmly. No, I've known Astrid since we were sophomores in college. I've seen her through breakups, family drama, career stress, everything. This isn't who she really is, but it's who she's choosing to be right now, and that's almost worse. The way Daisy spoke about Astrid was fascinating to me. There was love there, genuine friendship and loyalty, but also a clarity that I'd been lacking. She could see Astrid's flaws without making excuses for them, could acknowledge the damage being done without minimizing its impact. Can I ask you something? Daisy said, leaning forward slightly, and please be honest with me. I nodded. When was the last time you were genuinely happy? Not just content, not just going through the motions, but actually happy. The question caught me off guard. I started to give an automatic answer about being happy with my career, my apartment, my life in general. But Daisy's earnest expression made me really think about it. I don't remember, I admitted finally. Isn't that pathetic? I can't remember the last time I felt genuine joy about anything. It's not pathetic, Daisy said softly. It's heartbreaking. Something in her tone made me look up, really look at her. There was pain in her eyes, but not just sympathy for my situation. Something deeper, more personal. Daisy, are you okay? You look like you haven't been sleeping well. She gave a rueful laugh, perceptive as always. I've been having a hard time lately, watching all this happen. Watching Astrid tear down someone who, she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Someone who deserves so much better than what he's getting. You're a good friend, I said, to both of us. I know this situation can't be easy for you either. That's just it though, Daisy said, her voice growing stronger. I don't think I can keep being a good friend to both of you when one of you is systematically destroying the other. The statement hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to examine. What do you mean? Daisy took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for something difficult. I mean that friendship isn't supposed to be about staying neutral when someone you care about is being hurt. I've been trying to maintain this balance, to support Astrid while also trying to help you. But I'm starting to realize that might be impossible. She paused, staring down at her coffee. Ryker, I need to tell you something that Astrid probably wouldn't want you to know. My heart rate picked up. What is it? Last week after you left the restaurant, she didn't seem upset or regretful about what had happened. She seemed satisfied, like she'd accomplished something by making you uncomfortable in front of other people. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected that Astrid's public humiliations were intentional, but hearing it confirmed by someone who'd witnessed it, made it real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. She actually smiled when you walked outside, Daisy continued, her voice barely above a whisper. And when I asked her why she was being so harsh, she said that you needed to understand that she wasn't going to pretend to be someone she wasn't just to make you comfortable. But that's not what I've ever asked for, I said, feeling a mix of hurt and confusion. I just wanted her to treat me with basic respect. I know, Daisy said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with hers. That's what makes this so hard to watch. You're not asking for anything unreasonable. But she's treating every normal relationship expectation like it's an assault on her independence. The touch of Daisy's hand was warm and comforting in a way I hadn't experienced in months. When was the last time Astrid had touched me voluntarily, without it being part of some obligatory gesture? I don't know what to do, I admitted. Part of me thinks I should call off the engagement, but another part of me keeps hoping that if I'm patient enough, understanding enough, she'll remember why she said yes in the first place. Daisy's grip on my hand tightened slightly. Ryker, can I tell you something else? Something I probably shouldn't say as her best friend. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever she was about to reveal. I don't think Astrid ever really wanted to get married. To you, to anyone. I think she said yes because it felt like the next step she was supposed to take, but her heart was never really in it. And instead of being honest about that, she's been taking her resentment out on you. The truth of that statement settled over me like a heavy blanket. Deep down, I'd known it for months, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it impossible to deny anymore. So what does that mean? I asked. That I'd been fighting for a relationship that was doomed from the start. It means, Daisy said gently, that you deserve to be with someone who chooses you every day, not someone who treats loving you like a burden they're forced to carry. The way she said it, with such conviction and tenderness, made me look at her in a new light. Here was someone who had consistently shown up for me, who noticed when I wasn't sleeping well, who remembered how I liked my coffee, who was willing to risk her friendship with Astrid to make sure I knew I deserved better. Daisy, I started, then stopped, not sure how to finish the thought. What is it? Thank you for being honest with me, for caring enough to have this conversation. I know it couldn't have been easy. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. You don't have to thank me for that, Ryker. You're important to me too. The weight behind those words was unmistakable, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than resignation about my future. I felt hope. The confrontation that finally shattered everything happened 3 weeks after my coffee with Daisy, and it started with something as mundane as wedding invitations. I'd been thinking constantly about our conversation at Lighthouse Cafe, replaying Daisy's words about Astrid actually smiling when she'd hurt me. The knowledge sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold, making it impossible to pretend that things were normal between us. But I'd decided to make one last attempt at salvaging our relationship, to give Astrid a chance to explain herself, and maybe find our way back to each other. That's why I'd ordered sample wedding invitations from Belmont Stationery, without telling her. Nothing elaborate or expensive, just a few different designs, so we could finally make some concrete progress on our wedding plans. I thought maybe if I took the initiative, she always accused me of lacking, she might see that I was serious about building a life together. I was wrong. What the hell is this? Astrid's voice cut through our apartment like a blade, as she stood in our entryway, holding the package I'd left on the console table. She'd just returned from a late evening at Meridian Creative Agency, and her face was flushed with the kind of anger I'd never seen from her before. They're invitation samples, I said carefully, looking up from my laptop where I'd been working on quarterly reports. I thought we could look at them together, and you thought, Astrid interrupted, her voice rising to a pitch that made me instinctively tense. You thought you'd just go ahead and order wedding invitations without consulting me, as if I'm just some prop in your perfect life fantasy.
I stood up slowly, trying to keep my voice calm. Astrid, they're just samples. I wasn't trying to make decisions without you. I was trying to help us actually make some progress instead of avoiding the topic entirely. Progress toward what exactly? She threw the package down on our glass coffee table with enough force that I winced, afraid it might shatter. Toward a wedding I never asked for. Toward a marriage that feels more like a prison sentence every day. The words hit me like physical blows, but this time, instead of the usual crushing hurt, I felt something else rising in my chest. Anger. Clean, clarifying anger that cut through months of confusion and self-doubt. Then why did you say yes? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. When I proposed at Rosewood Gardens, why did you say yes if you never wanted to marry me? Astrid's laugh was bitter and sharp. Because that's what you're supposed to do, isn't it? When someone you've been dating for over a year gets down on one knee in front of half the city, you say yes. Because saying no would make you the villain in everyone else's story. So you've been lying to me for 2 years. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I was past caring about tone. You've been pretending to be engaged to someone you don't actually want to marry. I wasn't pretending anything. Astrid shot back, her dark eyes flashing with something that looked almost like panic. I thought maybe I could make it work. I thought maybe if I tried hard enough, I could be the person you wanted me to be. But I can't, Ryker. I can't be someone's devoted fiancé, who gets excited about centerpieces and seating charts and all the other meaningless garbage that goes with playing house. I never asked you to be anyone other than yourself, I said, feeling years of frustration finally spilling over. I fell in love with you, Astrid, with your intelligence and your passion and your independence. I never wanted to change you. Didn't you? She challenged, stepping closer with that predatory expression she wore when she was going in for the kill. Then why do you get that wounded look every time I point out that I don't want to spend my weekends browsing bridal magazines? Why do you act like I'm personally attacking you when I say that marriage feels like giving up my identity? Because you're not just expressing preferences, I said, my voice growing stronger as the truth finally crystallized. You're being deliberately cruel. You go out of your way to hurt me, to embarrass me in front of other people, to make me feel like loving you is some kind of character flaw. Astrid's expression faltered for just a moment, and I saw something that might have been shame flicker across her features. But then her walls went back up, higher than ever. If you feel attacked by honesty, that's your problem, she said coldly. I'm not going to apologize for refusing to play the role of the grateful girlfriend who's just so thankful to be chosen. Grateful? I stared at her, feeling like I was seeing her clearly for the first time in months. Astrid, do you hear yourself? I'm not some conquering hero who swept in to rescue you. We're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to choose each other every day, because we make each other's lives better. Well, congratulations, she said, with that cruel smile I'd come to dread. Because you've definitely made my life better by constantly reminding me how inadequate I am as a girlfriend. I have never, I started, but then I stopped, because I suddenly understood what was really happening here. You want me to break up with you. The words hung in the air between us, and I saw Astrid's mask slip completely for the first time in years. Instead of her usual defiant anger, I saw fear. What? You want me to be the one to end this? I continued. The pieces finally falling into place. You've been systematically destroying our relationship, making me miserable, hoping that eventually I'd get fed up enough to call off the engagement. That way you get to be the victim instead of the person who walked away. Astrid's face had gone pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. That's ridiculous. Is it? I took a step closer, and she actually backed away from me. Because it makes perfect sense. You don't want to marry me, but you also don't want to be the one who broke up with the nice guy who loves her. So instead, you've been slowly poisoning everything good between us, waiting for me to finally give up. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice was shaking now. Don't I? I pulled out my phone and opened my text messages. 3 days ago, you told your sister that you felt trapped in a relationship with someone who doesn't understand that love isn't supposed to feel like suffocation. Last week, you told your coworkers that I was one of those guys who thinks buying flowers fixes everything. And yesterday, you told Daisy that you'd rather die single than spend the rest of your life pretending to be happy. Astrid's eyes widened. Daisy told you that. Someone who actually cares about me told me that. I corrected. Someone who was tired of watching you systematically tear me down while I blamed myself for not being good enough. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 2 years of accumulated hurt and resentment. Finally Astrid sank onto our couch, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd seen her since the night I'd proposed. I never meant for it to go this far, she said quietly. I thought maybe if we broke up, we could still be friends eventually. I thought if you hated me, it would be easier for both of us. Easier than what? I asked, though I was no longer angry. Just tired, so incredibly tired. Easier than admitting that I'm not built for this, she said, gesturing vaguely around our shared apartment. Easier than facing the fact that I probably shouldn't be in any serious relationship until I figure out why the idea of commitment makes me want to run screaming in the opposite direction. It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in months, and despite everything, I felt a flicker of something that might have been compassion for the woman I'd once loved. Astrid, I said gently, sitting down on the opposite end of the couch, you could have just talked to me. If you were having doubts, if you were scared, if you needed space, we could have worked through it together. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Could we have though? Really? Because every time I tried to express any uncertainty about our timeline or our future, you'd get this panicked look like I was about to abandon you. And then I'd feel guilty for having doubts, and then I'd resent feeling guilty, and everything just spiraled from there. I thought back over the past 2 years, trying to see our interactions through her eyes. Had I been pressuring her without realizing it? Had my own insecurities about losing her made it impossible for her to be honest about her fears? Maybe you're right, I admitted. Maybe I was so afraid of losing you that I made it impossible for you to tell me the truth. But Astrid, The way you've been treating me these past months, that wasn't about fear or uncertainty. That was cruel." She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know it was. I turned you into the enemy, because it was easier than facing my own issues. And I'm sorry, Ryker. I'm so sorry for what I put you through." The apology I'd been desperately wanting for months finally came, but it was too late. The damage was done, and we both knew it. "I need you to move out," I said quietly. "Tonight. I can't do this anymore." Astrid nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'll call Daisy, ask if I can stay with her until I find a place." "Astrid," I said, as she stood up to go pack, "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I really do." She paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at me with something that might have been regret. "I hope you find someone who deserves you, Ryker. Someone who chooses you the way you deserve to be chosen." As I watched her disappear upstairs to pack her things, I realized that maybe I already had. The weeks following Astrid's departure passed in a strange kind of peace I hadn't experienced in over a year. Our apartment in Willowbrook Heights felt different without her presence, larger somehow, as if the walls had been holding their breath, and could finally exhale. The tension that had become so constant I'd stopped noticing it was simply gone, replaced by a quiet that felt restorative, rather than empty. Daisy had immediately offered to let Astrid stay at her place, because that was who Daisy was, someone who showed up for people even when it was inconvenient. But she'd also made it clear that she wouldn't tolerate any more cruel behavior toward me. Friendship or no friendship. "I love Astrid," she'd told me during one of our increasingly frequent coffee meetings at Lighthouse Cafe. "But I love you too, and I'm tired of pretending that what she did to you was acceptable just because she was scared." It was during these conversations that I began to truly see Daisy, not just as Astrid's best friend, or the mediator in our relationship drama, but as the remarkable woman she was in her own right. She was brilliant at her marketing job at Meridian Creative Agency, often staying late to perfect campaigns that her colleagues would have considered good enough. She volunteered at the Millbrook Animal Shelter every weekend, coming home with stories about the dogs she was helping to socialize. She remembered birthdays, sent thank you notes, and somehow always knew exactly what to say when someone was struggling. Most importantly, she never once made me feel like caring about her was a burden or an imposition. "You know," I said, one evening as we walked through Crescent Park after dinner at Giovanni's Italian kitchen, "I don't think I ever properly thanked you." "For what?" Daisy asked, pausing beside the fountain that marked the center of the park. The evening light caught the gold highlights in her strawberry blonde hair, and I found myself wondering how I'd never noticed how beautiful she was. "For seeing me," I said simply. "For the past 2 years, I felt like I was disappearing, like every day I became a little less myself, because I was trying so hard to be whatever Astrid wanted me to be. But you always saw me, the real me." Daisy's cheeks flushed pink in the fading sunlight. "Ryker, that's not something you need to thank me for. That's just how you love someone. You see them completely, especially the parts they try to hide." The word love hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities neither of us had been brave enough to explore while I was still engaged to her best friend. But now, standing in the golden hour light, with this woman who had consistently shown me more kindness and understanding than I'd received in months from the person I was supposed to marry, I felt something shifting in my chest. "Daisy," I began, then stopped, not sure how to articulate what I was feeling. "What is it?" she asked gently, the way she always did, with patience and genuine interest, as if whatever I had to say was the most important thing in the world. "I think I've been in love with the wrong person." The words came out quietly, but they felt like the most honest thing I'd said in years. Daisy's eyes widened, and I saw hope flicker across her features before she carefully schooled her expression. "Ryker, you just ended an engagement 3 weeks ago. You're probably feeling grateful and confused and—" "No," I interrupted, stepping closer to her. "I'm feeling clear for the first time in years. Daisy, what I felt for Astrid was infatuation. It was intense and passionate and ultimately destructive, because it was based on who I thought she was, not who she actually was." I reached out and gently took her hands in mine, marveling at how perfectly they fit. "But with you, it's different. It's built on actually knowing each other, on respect and kindness and genuine friendship. You've seen me at my worst, defeated and confused and doubting myself,
and you never once made me feel like I was too much or not enough." Tears were gathering in Daisy's green eyes. "You're not too much," she whispered. "You're not even close to too much." "I love you," I said, and saying it felt like coming home. "I love your laugh and your terrible jokes and the way you cry during dog movies. I love how you fight for the people you care about and how you make everyone around you feel valued and heard. I love that you choose kindness, even when it's difficult." "Ryker," she breathed, and I could see in her expression that she felt it too. This rightness, this sense of pieces finally falling into place. "I know it's complicated," I continued. "I know the timing is terrible, and that this might create problems with Astrid. But Daisy, I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just friendship." She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if she was trying to memorize it. Then, finally, she smiled, that radiant, genuine smile that had been sustaining me through the darkest period of my life. "I've been in love with you since the day we met," she admitted. "At that gallery opening 3 years ago, when you were too honest about why you were there, and too kind to pretend you understood contemporary art. I watched you with Astrid and told myself that wanting my best friend's boyfriend made me a terrible person." "You're not a terrible person," I said firmly. "You're the best person I know." The kiss that followed was nothing like the desperate, complicated passion I'd shared with Astrid. It was warm and sure and felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. That's when I knew what I had to do. 2 days later, I was standing outside Daisy's apartment with the ring that had spent 2 years on Astrid's finger. I'd had it cleaned and reset at Hoffman Jewelers, not because there was anything wrong with it, but because this moment deserved to be entirely new. Daisy opened the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Hey," she said, smiling. "I wasn't expecting you until—" I dropped to one knee right there in her doorway, pulling out the ring box before I could lose my courage. "Daisy Harper," I began, my voice shaking with emotion. "I spent 2 years in a relationship where I had to beg for scraps of affection, where I constantly wondered if I was asking for too much by simply wanting to be loved. But you've shown me what it looks like to be chosen completely, without reservation or resentment." Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling so brightly it took my breath away. "You've been my best friend, my advocate, my safe harbor in every storm. You've seen me at my absolute worst, and somehow convinced me that I deserve better. I don't want to waste another day pretending that what we have is anything less than extraordinary." I opened the ring box, revealing the emerald-cut diamond that now felt like it had always been meant for her. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to love you as completely as you've loved me?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." I slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, just like everything else about us. That's when we heard the sharp intake of breath behind me. Astrid stood frozen in the hallway, clearly having come to visit Daisy. Her face cycled through shock, hurt, and something that might have been understanding. "Astrid," Daisy started, but Astrid held up a hand. "No, it's okay," she said quietly. "I can see it now, the way you look at each other. God, how long have you two been?" "It just happened," I said, honestly, standing up, but keeping Daisy's hand firmly in mine. "After you moved out, we realized what we'd been feeling for each other." Astrid was quiet for a long moment, studying us both. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in over a year. "You know what's funny?" she said. "I'm not even angry. I'm relieved. Seeing you two together, it's like a puzzle piece, finally clicking into place. You belong together in a way that we never did." She stepped closer, her expression growing serious. "Ryker, I'm sorry for everything I put you through. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. And Daisy," she turned to her best friend with tears in her eyes, "thank you for being brave enough to love him the way he deserves to be loved." 6 months later, we had our wedding at Evergreen Gardens, a small outdoor venue overlooking the lake. It was everything my wedding with Astrid never could have been. Joyful, genuine, filled with people who were genuinely happy for us. Astrid was there, having started therapy, and begun the work of figuring out who she was outside of her fear of commitment. She'd even started dating someone new, a fellow artist who appreciated her independence, and didn't try to change her. As Daisy and I exchanged vows under the setting sun, surrounded by family and friends who had watched our love story unfold, I couldn't help but think about how different my life might have been if I'd settled for someone who treated loving me like a burden. Instead, I'd found someone who chose me every single day. Someone who saw marriage not as a trap, but as an adventure we'd take together. And for the first time in years, I was genuinely, completely happy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.